When a socialist country has a famine, we blame it on socialism. And we even say their government murdered their own people. When a capitalist country has a famine, like the one that occurred in the US during the Great Depression, where 7 million people died, we don't blame it on capitalism. We just say it was an unfortunate event. When the majority of countries in this world are poor, other than the US and Western Europe, we don't blame it on capitalism. We blame it on corrupt government or the people. But when socialist countries are poor and are under decades of economic sanctions, we blame socialism. You see the problem? For all you guys who are in your 20s or were too young or maybe not even born when the US invaded Iraq, and look back at that and think like, how the hell did that happen? And how the hell did they gain public support for this invasion and war based on lies? Like, the people fully agreed with that for the most part. Well, the exact same thing is happening with Russia. For me, it's like reliving 2003 all over again. And Russia is saying they're not going to invade. Ukraine is saying they're not going to invade. Countries like Germany and France are saying they're not going to invade, but the US is like, yes, they're going to invade. They're going to, like, gaining public support, manufacturing consent for war again.
Thank you very much for complimenting me on my English. My comrades in Eastern Europe worked very hard to help me speak with a better accent, like the one I use when I make TikToks, like this one, because I was actually born and raised in the States and live in the United States. And I'm told I actually speak with a slight New York accent because that's where I'm from. See, just because you disagree with US foreign policy and you understand the history of what the US has done and how it continues that foreign policy in oppressing other countries today, doesn't make you a Russian propagandist or a Romanian or anything like that. It makes you a human being, someone with a conscience.
American exceptionalism is the idea that the United States is inherently different from other nations, being perceived both domestically and internationally as superior to other nations, or having a unique mission to transform the world. A sad reality many Americans refuse to face is that the US is responsible for more crimes against humanity and genocides than any other country on the face of this earth. Whenever the US starts a conflict, millions die, that entire region of the world becomes destabilized, and we're all a lot worse off for it. I want us to start seeing this. It's literally a matter of life and death for millions of people right now. I was actually a conservative in high school. I was a conservative until I was 22 years old. Some of the things that influenced me to become a communist was traveling, especially traveling to third world capitalist countries. And later on in life, I traveled to Cuba, where I spoke with many people and learned the true history of their revolution in that country, not what we hear today. Another thing that made me a communist was growing up and entering the workforce and seeing what it's really like as a worker in this country, where most people take two routes eventually. They say, I want to become a business owner, I think I'm a future millionaire, or they fight for workers. And I chose to fight for workers. So for many of us communists, growing up and taking a look at the world around us made us communists. I don't think you're aware of the brutality that the US has inflicted around the world, especially in the global south, especially in Latin America, where it's installed several fascist dictatorships that ruled with brutality, did not allow freedom of speech. The US still has colonies with second-class citizens where they can't vote for president. They have pretend Congress members that can't vote on legislations. We fought a revolution over this, and this is what we're doing to other people. The US government and media are very good at projecting what the US does and has done on other countries. Now, I don't support Russia, and there are things I criticize about China, but the US are the last people to get involved in this kind of conflict and to share an opinion. The US needs to shut up, and its media needs to stop manufacturing consent for war. When Europeans, or people of European descent, are bombed and attacked, the whole world stops. We're praying for them. We change our profile picture to their flag. But when people of color are attacked by people of European descent, it's just any other day. Nobody cares.
Unthinkable has happened to them. And this is not a developing third world nation.
This is the second journalist displaying overt white supremacy, saying what many of us have been observing from the outset of this conflict, that the media and many of us in society have a very different reaction when this type of violence happens in Europe to people of a lighter skin tone. The outrage, the prayers. People in places like Palestine, the Middle East, and even in Latin America have been dealing with this type of violence for generations. This isn't to minimize what the Ukrainians are going through. It's horrific, and I want them to live in peace. I oppose the Russian invasion of their country, but I also oppose the 8 years of violence the Ukrainian government has inflicted on eastern Ukraine, and the violence the US and Europe has waged all across the developing world, where many of us couldn't care less about the millions who have died. Let's be anti-war across the board. No! Have you ever wondered how unions have become so weak and their membership so low in this country? One of the biggest reasons for that is the Taft-Hartley Act of 1947. Shortly after World War II, the US government, under pressure from the business community, started chipping away at the New Deal reforms that strengthened the working class and created the middle class. The Taft-Hartley Act created the conditions for right-to-work states. I know we've all heard about that, where non-dues-paying workers would enjoy the same benefits as dues-paying workers. Union leaders had to make an anti-communist pledge. The Free Speech Clause authorizes employers to hold so-called captive audience meetings to dissuade employees from joining a union. I know we've all heard about companies like Walmart and Amazon doing that to their workers. One of the best things we can do for the working class in our country is to demand the end of the Taft-Hartley Act. A divided working class is a defeated working class. By now, we've all seen the lopsided press coverage of the conflict in Ukraine compared to conflicts in other parts of the world. And many of you might be wondering, why? Well, it has to do with capitalism. And I know what many of you might be thinking, this guy in capitalism again? See, capitalism is a system based on hierarchy and competition, and it was invented here. And the people at the top of the socioeconomic hierarchy want to stay there, wouldn't you? So the press, our government, our culture will put more value on their lives than the rest of us. And I'm not saying you shouldn't care about the lives of Ukrainians in that conflict, but I am saying you should care about these people. And these people just as much. I recently had a family member tell me they're worried about the Soviet invasion of Ukraine going further into Western Europe. And I said, wait, did you say Soviet? And they were like, yeah, the Soviet Union, Putin, he's a communist. And I was like, the Soviet Union fell in 1991. Do you want to see what party Putin is a part of, what their ideology is? It says Russian nationalism and conservatism. Putin is a conservative. They're right-wing. We need to do better. Yeah, it's very rare that I find anyone that knows about the US military's genocide in the Philippines. People know about Puerto Rico, they know about Hawaii, and not enough. But the Philippines, it's very rare. And speaking about US genocide and imperialism, do you know who the father of US imperialism is? President Theodore Roosevelt, the founder of the progressive movement in the United States, also the founder of U.S. imperialism. Remember, this was about 30 years after the end of slavery, and U.S. companies wanted raw materials. They wanted cheap labor, but they wanted to do it far away from U.S. shores to not anger the American people. And he was a white supremacist, so his idea was, let's do this to brown people far away from here, and the American people will never know. One of the most evil men this country has ever seen. More on this man, the 26th President of the United States, Teddy Roosevelt, the father of the progressive movement and the father of U.S. imperialism. Yes, that's right, he is the father of both. 30 years after the end of slavery, the American worker was living and working in deplorable conditions, and Roosevelt had an idea. He was going to regulate banks and regulate capitalism for the first time, improving the lives of everyday Americans. But he wasn't going to hurt corporate profits. He was going to begin U.S. imperialism. Until then, the U.S. was an isolationist country. They had the Monroe Doctrine, which simply told Europe no more colonization of Latin America. But do you know who was about to start colonizing Latin America? The U.S. took colonies like Puerto Rico and neo-colonies like Cuba in order to extract their natural resources and use their people as cheap labor. This is your daily reminder that there is a lot of pain in this world. There are people being oppressed in this world right now. And you're only going to live once. And spend that life not saying things like this person. You're only going to live once. Advocate for the poor. Help people in your community. And when you speak up for the oppressed, not the oppressor. I promise you, you'll feel good about it. You'll feel good that if you lived 200 years ago, you probably would not have supported slavery and the genocide of the Native American people. This person, with the way they think, they probably would have. Don't be like them. We have enough people like them. I want to share with you a little critique I have of leftist TikTok and leftists on social media in general. I see a lot of us just speaking into the leftist echo chamber. What I mean by that is I see people saying, if you comment angrily on my TikTok, I'm going to delete it and block you. Or answering angry messages with even angrier TikTok responses. My question to you is, did you expect anything different? This is America. These people are brainwashed and indoctrinated. Were you born a socialist? How did you get radicalized? By people calling you a shit lib? Or by someone saying, I understand where you're coming from, and I used to think like that too, but this is what I've learned.
Butterfly in the sky, I can go twice as high. Take a look, it's in a book, a reading rainbow.
Throughout time, there have been three main arguments conservatives have made in opposition to improving society, and this was found during the French Revolution, in their transition from feudalism to capitalism. First is the pervasivity theory. All progress has an opposite effect. Second is futility theory. Any attempt at making things better just won't work. And the third is jeopardy theory. These people that want to improve things are just going to make it worse. Originally, the people who made these arguments wanted to still live under a king. Today, conservatives are afraid of not living under an oligarchy.
The U.S. was created by a group of white slave-owning oligarchs who didn't want to pay their fair share of taxes, and created an ethnostate where only white men who owned land could participate in government. Everyone else was a slave or a second-class citizen.
You gon' make me need better, know that. Even with your friend, you ain't even have me lying on you, know that.
So Bolivia just caught a recent U.S. arms shipment heading to right-wing forces. Now this is really bad, and if you're not familiar with recent Bolivian history, I'll catch you up right now. In 2006, Bolivia elected their first indigenous socialist president, Evo Morales. He lifted 11 million people out of poverty. Part of what they did was nationalize their lithium mines, which angered the US. In 2019, the US supported a fascist coup overthrowing Evo Morales and the MAS party of Bolivia. MAS stands for Movimiento a Socialismo, Movement for Socialism. Lithium is very important for the United States right now and its capitalist overlords because lithium is the main ingredient in lithium-ion batteries. Elon Musk famously said, "We will coup whoever we want. Deal with it." See, it's not enough for the US and its companies to trade for Bolivian lithium. US companies want to own the land, own the mines, because whoever owns natural resources owns the world. A year after the coup, the right-wing party actually had elections where the Socialist Party won in a landslide, a huge win for the working class and poor. But here we are again, the Biden administration doing exactly what the Reagan administration did, funding and training right-wing fascist paramilitary groups. US imperialism is alive and well, and we must oppose it.
My pants and I got a few baddies up under my belt. Oh, bitch, I'm a big gangster. I turn around.
So I used to box. Here's a trophy and a medal I won. I wasn't amazing, but I competed and I was pretty good. And this is what they would tell big, bulky guys like you if you ever walked into the boxing gym. They'd tell you, stop lifting weights. You're going to get hurt. You're going to get knocked out. Because thin guys like me would wait about a minute, dance around, wait for you to get gassed out, wait until you couldn't move anymore, and then we would knock you out. Because the old saying goes, the bigger you are, the harder they fall. So I would really enjoy that year of free gas. I would absolutely fight you.
Будь-яка активність політиків, спрямована на розкол чи на колаборацію, не матиме успіху, але отримає жорстку відповідь. І тому Рада національної безпеки та оборони України вирішила, враховуючи повномасштабну війну, розв'язану Російською Федерацією та зв'язки деяких політичних структур з цією державою, призупиняється будь-яка діяльність низки політичних партій на час воєнного стану, а саме Опозиційна платформа «За життя», партія Шарія, Наші, Опозиційний блок, Ліва опозиція, Союз лівих сил, Держава, Прогресивна соціалістична партія України, Соціалістична партія України, партія Соціаліст, Блок Володимира Сава.
Why do I believe in open borders? Well, the US is stolen land. It wasn't won over with heroic battles. It was taken by genocide and broken treaties. Now, imagine you promise someone that you're not going to steal their home from them, and then you come in the middle of the night and kill them and take their home. That's what the United States did. Now, if any immigrants, many of whom are indigenous, want to come up to the United States for safety and opportunities, mainly because the US destroyed their home nations by US imperialism, there should be no reason not to let them.
Crazy.
Have you noticed storage facilities like this going up everywhere and wondered why? Well, it's not a good thing, and here are two reasons why. The first reason is that foreclosures are up, evictions are up. People are moving out of their apartments and moving in with roommates, moving back in with parents because they can't afford their mortgages and they can't afford their rents. The second reason is that we just live in a society where everywhere we go, we are told to buy stuff. Even our cell phones are listening to us right now, trying to find a way to advertise to us. I was telling a coworker the other day, I'm thinking about buying sneakers, and all of a sudden I'm getting sneaker ads. And people get manipulated this way, and then they buy all this crap they don't need, and they need some place to put it. This is all a result of late-stage capitalism. Have you heard the term cultural hegemony? Cultural hegemony is something that affects or has affected all of us, including me. This term was first coined by Italian Marxist Antonio Gramsci, who eventually was imprisoned for 10 years by Italian fascist Benito Mussolini and died as a result of his imprisonment. Cultural hegemony is the idea that the dominant ideology of society The beliefs, explanations, perceptions, values, and morals reflects that of the ruling class. The dominant ideology justifies the social, political, and economic status quo as natural, inevitable, perpetual, and beneficial for everyone, rather than as artificial social constructs that benefit only the ruling class. So how does this reflect in our society today? Well, how often do you see poor working class people thinking of themselves as future millionaires just down on their luck instead of advocating for the working class? How often do you see members of the working class defending their capitalist oppressors, saying things like, without them we would have nothing, and defending an economic system that is oppressing them, while being horrified by any alternative where the working class would be in power? When you learn about cultural hegemony, you see it everywhere, are disgusted by it, and want to change it.
I'm literally built as an athlete. Every blood test I've ever done has said that I am like over the normal limit of athleticness.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you 5 reasons why you're always going to be broke coming from a multimillionaire. Number 1, you shop at Starbucks. Number 2, you do not bring a lunch to work. Number 3, you live paycheck to paycheck. Number 4, you make your minimum payment on your credit card. Number 5, last but not least, you buy liabilities, not assets.
Take from me. You got my blood, now it's my car!
It's a sign of being a beta male.
I didn't know that.
Because real men are conservative, Republican, and strong in nature. So I'm concerned if you're a liberal or progressive.
If I became conservative, would I no longer be beta?
You become alpha.
Well, something to think about.
You're saying that all the men and women in uniform for the United States military do is go around the world and kill brown people for oil?
See, this man's comment right here is dripping with what is called American exceptionalism. It is a really tough pill to swallow, the realization of the death, the destruction, at times the state-sponsored terrorism, the involvement of U.S. military members in direct murder of innocent people, not to keep American citizens safe, but to benefit American companies to come and pillage natural resources from these lands. This map is just of Latin America, and the mass murder that the U.S. has military caused there. It is estimated 300,000 innocent people dead just in Latin America for the benefit of U.S. companies to steal resources. Because if you own the resources, you control the world. And it's not just oil. That's too simplistic a view. The United States invaded Haiti to steal their gold. In 1973, the U.S. invaded Chile and overthrew their government to take their copper. In 2019, the U.S. backed a far right-wing faction of the Bolivian government so U.S. companies can steal their lithium, because lithium is in so much demand right now due to lithium-ion batteries. Elon Musk said, "We will coup whoever we want." Now, I understand why most young people join the military. They don't want to go to war. They don't want to go overseas. They just want housing assistance. They want healthcare. They want education assistance. But they're not there to get that. They are there to serve U.S. imperialism. And they should reflect on that before they join.
And they wonder why so many people are getting interested in socialism.
So this is a pretty amazing development that Amazon shareholders are now going to have a vote on improving the conditions in their warehouses, not just in New York or Staten Island, but globally. This is from only one warehouse unionizing. This is what I've been saying the entire time, that us workers, we don't know the incredible power that we have because all these shareholders' profit comes from the workers. Without the workers, they're going to have nothing. And of course, we know this is a tactic to stop the unions because by improving the conditions of the workers, they'll try to tell the workers, look, you don't need a union, we've done this for you. But we know that's not going to work. This is really becoming a return of the early 20th century when workers united and unionized and fought for better wages and conditions, but hopefully this time we'll take it further.
These two nations are more democratic than the nation we live in.
I can confirm this. I went to Cuba in 2019, as you can see, and when I was there, I sat down with a lot of people and we compared our different governments, our electoral processes and how they work. And when I talked to them about how our system works, a lot of times their mouths would fall to the floor. Like they knew it was bad, but they didn't know how bad. For example, the Electoral College, like they didn't know that depending on what part of the country you live, your vote counts differently. And there's this ultimate body of people who decide the election, not the people. And that absolutely horrified them. Like in Cuba, everyone's vote counts the same, and you can also run for office, and you don't have to be rich or have the backing of rich and powerful people. So the Cuban system, definitely better in a lot of ways.
Elon Musk uses a secret to enhance his productivity.
His workers. It's his workers who enhance productivity and are the source of his profit. It's not him, it's his workers.
What's one thing you can say to a white Christian conservative that will immediately make them upset?
There are 47,000 Palestinian Christians in the occupied territories of Israel. That's Gaza, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem. And these Palestinian Christians are under the same oppression as the Palestinian Muslims. There's no difference. And by uncritically supporting Israel, they are supporting the ethnic cleansing of their own people. And not only that, but these are the first Christian communities of all time ever, dating back to the actual time of Christ.
There's no need even to have a college degree at all, or even high school. I mean, if somebody graduated from a great university, that may be an indication that they will be capable of great things.
Now, if you want to be a hustler, a con man, a capitalist, especially if your parents were already billionaires with their wealth from an emerald mine in apartheid South Africa, what he's saying is very likely true. If you start off in life with tons of wealth and tons of privilege, it's likely that you do not need a college degree to become wealthy or even more wealthy. And more people from the working class are resorting to hustle culture and cons and schemes to try to get rich quick. But the problem for us is that we don't have billionaire parents to fall back on, like Elon Musk. If we fail, we are in poverty and we are in a very destitute situation. And the fact still remains that people with a bachelor's degree make 75% more than people without a bachelor's degree. And what we should be fighting for is to make secondary school affordable. And that just doesn't mean university. That means associate's degrees. That means certification. That can even mean becoming a nurse or your local fire academy. Because all those things will get you more than trying to hustle and becoming the next Elon Musk. See, the problem with libertarianism is that their ideas are not based in any history or factual reality. And there's a term for that. It's called idealism. Anytime an oppressed group throughout history won equal rights or more rights wasn't by suing through the courts. It was either by organizing, pressuring the government, or violence. And then libertarians believe in this term called the non-aggression principle. It's the belief that capitalism is the equal and voluntary exchange of goods and services. The problem is you can't separate the violence from capitalism. Slavery existed until 1865 when there was a war to end it. Child labor existed because these families were starving and they had to have their small children go out and work. company towns existed, and these workers were trapped in these little towns being paid by scrip. During the Industrial Revolution, striking workers who were demanding the 8-hour workday, safe conditions, and the 5-day work week had capitalists call the police, National Guard, and private security called Pinkertons to murder them. When the goal of the capitalist is profit by any means necessary, they will go to any length to get that profit. And right behind me is the future that libertarians so desperately want. How does that look to you?
Like as in the Palestinians, obviously if that's what they want, and the Arab Israelis if that's what they want as well. The question is, can we actually do that without endangering ourselves? And that's what it's...
I've heard this argument in the past by Israeli apologists that giving Palestinians equal rights would actually endanger the Israeli people. And we have precedent for this. We have 2 past apartheid states that are no longer apartheid states. The photo behind me is of the Chicago race riots during the 1960s. Race riots were very commonplace in the US during Jim Crow, which was an apartheid system oppressing African Americans. And as you can see, it even occurred in the North as well because of the unbelievable oppression these people experienced. There was also a lot of organized and unorganized defensive violence in apartheid South Africa that ended when their apartheid system ended. So if Israel was serious about peace and having less defensive violence committed against them by the Palestinian people, they would end their apartheid/ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people. But they are not serious about it. They are waging an extermination against the indigenous population of the land they are occupying.
In one sentence or less, tell me what your political party is without telling me what your political party is.
In 2016, it went from progressive green capitalism to eco-socialist. No! Wow. This is the kind of question where I think every single person on this earth will give a different answer. So I'll give you my answer. The meaning of life is to do everything I can to try to be happy and fulfilled. To try to leave this place better than how I found it. And also to try to do everything I can to make sure that other people are happy and fulfilled. My definition of freedom is a 2-part answer. You need 2 things. The first thing you need is to have your basic needs be met, because you're not free if you're struggling to find shelter, food, access to clean water, Maslow's hierarchy of needs type of stuff. The second part of my definition for freedom is, do you have a true say in how your society functions? Now, let's look at the United States. Are our basic needs met? Do the people in leadership put meeting our basic needs as a priority? No. Now let's look at the second part. Do we have a true say in how our society functions? No. We have a very corrupt and corruptible electoral system. Depending on where you live, your vote counts different amounts. We have the Electoral College that has the final say, and elections that could or could not be rigged or very heavily influenced by the people in power. I'll address this because I get called a tankie all the time, and I've never considered myself a tankie or a Marxist-Leninist or a vanguardist, and I'll tell you why. I think the societies that transitioned to socialism in the 20th century needed a vanguard party. There was mass illiteracy and poverty, and they needed a strong central group in order to build socialism and maintain socialism once the capitalist class was overthrown. And I do think that in industrialized societies like the US, an organization or organizations like that are important to build socialism. However, I do not think that once the transition from capitalism to socialism has begun, a vanguard party is helpful or beneficial. I would really like your opinions and comments, especially if you disagree with me. I could take it.
That's anecdotal evidence. That's not real. What you really need to trust is all the people that...
Thank you, Jeremy, for this TikTok. It raises a really important question. How do we properly analyze information and come to the right conclusion? The answer Jeremy gives is that we should follow our anecdotal experience. That's the right way to go. He mentions his mistrust of the government and large corporations, and I could completely relate to that. After all, I don't trust them either. But is trusting my anecdotal evidence the right way? That's not right either. I can use that as a small part of coming to my conclusion, but that shouldn't be the main thing I use to come to my worldview. So the best way to form your conclusions is critical analysis. Try to find the most respected opinions on both sides of an argument and read them and try to understand them best and then form your opinions. And then always leave a little space to understand that you might be wrong and your idea should change. This person right here is very upset about the definition of the word racism, and I'm sure they would like to change it. I know many of us see this all the time, people disagreeing or disputing the definition of the word, and it's not going to change, and we're especially not going to let the group of people who historically have been racist change the meaning of the word. Words have meanings, and it's definitely not going to change because you want it to change. And as I said earlier, it's very rare that you see a racist or a fascist admit to what they are. And that's usually because they are cowardly or uninformed, which is very different from communists who very proudly admit what we are. Communism is based. I'm from New York City. I was born in Manhattan. Lived in Queens when I was very little. Then we moved to Long Island, which is a suburb of New York City. And I lived there for several years, and those are actually my least happy times living in Long Island. Most people want to get out of the city and live in the suburbs. I was just not happy there. As soon as I could, I moved back to the city, moved back to Queens, and then I moved to the most affordable part of the city because New York is just so incredibly expensive now, and I've been in the Bronx for about 12 years now, and I love it. Hey, Ben, I got a great idea.
What's that, Charlie?
We're going to go around to colleges, arguing against college freshmen, promoting our far-right ideology, and we're going to look so smart. I'm going to call it Turning Point USA.
Charlie, that sounds so good. Especially the fact that I speak really, really fast. It makes me sound really smart, even though I don't really know so much.
Oh, absolutely. Your fast talking makes you sound way smarter than you actually are. I love it. You can come along anytime.
Should we ever debate actual adults who are well-informed and highly educated on the issues?
Terrible idea, Ben. Terrible. Please don't ever do that. It could actually ruin everything for us.
I said I feel invincible. It's 100 niggas in the spot. I won't keep going. It's 85 just to walk.
I don't want everyone that invests in real estate to think you just get to collect these rent checks.
You just said that the only reason you're there doing that work on your property is because the property manager quit on you, which means that you're usually just collecting a check. Let me put it like this. Landlords are the worst capitalists because unlike the capitalists who exploit labor, landlords exploit people's need for shelter. That is just fucking evil. And landlords inflate housing prices so potential homeowners cannot buy homes and are forced to rent. The goal of any landlord is to make passive income, and that is exploitation. I'm so sad. I can't believe everyone's been making fun of me so much.
What's wrong, Caitlin? What's the matter?
Ever since people found out that I pooped my pants one time at a party in college, I have a hard time going around to colleges and arguing with college freshmen about my ridiculous right-wing ideology. My whole career is ruined.
Don't worry about that, Caitlin. A little while ago, I said if a woman gets wet during intercourse, there's something wrong with her, and I became a laughingstock.
Oh my God, I remember that. That's so funny. Oh my God. Thank you. That just made me feel so much better. Thank you, Ben. Oh my God, you're so stupid. We conservatives believe in small government, and we just want to be free for the government to leave us alone. Except for me, we want a lot of guys like me running around the world overthrowing democratically elected governments and stealing their oil for American companies. Oh yeah, government better have a blank check for guys like me too. We need a lot of guys like me running around. Oh yeah, and anyone that lives an alternative lifestyle of what I think is right, I want the government up their fucking ass 24/7. So what I really mean is, I want small government and to be left alone for people that look like me and act like me, but anyone else, fuck them.
Elon Musk tweeted, "If I die under mysterious circumstances, it's been nice knowing you."
Unfortunately, on this timeline, it's not the wealthy, greedy capitalists that get unalived before it's supposed to be their time to go. It's people like this, people like this, men like this, almost this entire race of people, and this absolute saint. Sadly, these parasites usually end up living very long and healthy lives. Get me out of here.
Being a liberal means I'm just a really good person, and I believe everyone should have equal rights, especially people of color and different oppressed groups. And you know, seeing how terrible Trump was, Ronald Reagan actually wasn't so bad.
Wow, thank you so much. That really means a lot to me. You know, I really had a feeling 40 years ago that all those changes I made would just create so much abundance and a wonderful society. So glad to see the liberals came on board eventually.
Oh, we sure did. Some of us even like George W. Bush now.
So let me get this straight. You advocate for people of color and oppressed groups, but what about the systems that create that oppression, like capitalism?
What are you, a commie? This is a capitalist country and it's not going to change. Don't you know communism killed 100 million gazillion people?
I used to say that there's no such thing as class reductionism. It's just a false allegation that liberals throw at leftists. But if you are familiar with leftist YouTube, you might be familiar with Caleb Maupin, the culturally conservative socialist. If you're not familiar with Caleb, he's kind of the Alex Jones of socialism. He is the caricature of vanguardists that anti-vanguardists like to throw at us. People, he does not represent us in the least. Have you encountered any of these people who identify as constitutional conservatives? I'll give you a little heads up on these guys. They're garbage. Why? Because they believe in the strict interpretation of the original Constitution. And the Constitution only enshrines rights for one group of people. You guessed it, white men. So if they could take your rights away tomorrow, they would. Oh yeah, remember that Soviet stock market? All those landlords and
20 million people died in a famine, to which you always say it wasn't real communism or it wasn't real socialism. So which was it? Was it real communism? Was it real socialism, or wasn't it? Or do you only care and do you only put forth the effort to say that the Soviet Union was better when it comes to things they beat us in that were good? By the way, they landed a lunar rover on the moon after we put fucking people there. Congratulations. They figured out how to put a robot on the moon after we'd already technically done it. Like, I would rather be in the company of the country that came in second in most of the lunar shit, but didn't have to worry about fucking starving to death. Because, you know, my fucking rulers are assholes. Also, you know, not having as much of a chance of going to the gulag. There's still a fucking chance. Don't get me wrong, the Soviet Union and the United States are basically the same fucking thing. But, come on.
oh yeah, remember that Soviet stock market? All those landlords.
20 million people died in a famine, to which you always say it wasn't real communism or it wasn't real socialism.
I love how these guys make up new numbers for the death toll of the Holodomor. 20 million it is today. Maybe it'll be 80 million tomorrow or 60 kajillion, but this is the real number of the famine that occurred all throughout Eastern Europe. The Bengal famine, which occurred under capitalism, was 2.1 million to 3.8 million. The Irish potato famine, which was also committed by the UK, killed 20 to 25% of the entire Irish population. The Dust Bowl famine in the US during the Great Depression killed 7,000 people. But let's not blame capitalism on that. That's not capitalism's fault. 20 million people died in World War I, which was basically just a turf war between capitalist nations. And 85 million people died in World War II, which was started by fascists and imperialists. And then we have 20 million people who die in capitalist countries annually from preventable diseases. And then our friend goes on to say that the US won the space race, which is a little embarrassing. Take a look at this chart right here. Who does it look like won the space race? And then he goes on to say that I say that the Soviet Union wasn't real socialism, when the TikTok that he stitched was me saying that the Soviet Union was socialism. I don't know, you can't make it up. I'm sure he's a nice guy. I'm sure he has other good qualities.
Tell me about a time that you got fired from your job for an actual good reason.
So I just become an EMT and had a baby, and I went to work at an ambulance company in New Jersey, and they paid a whopping $9.50 an hour, and I couldn't survive on it, neither could my family. So I went to Pennsylvania, and I got a job at a second ambulance company there. But the New Jersey company had a non-compete clause. They didn't want you working anywhere else. And somehow someone from the New Jersey company saw me working for the Pennsylvania company. So they pulled me in the office and they asked me, "Where's your loyalty at?" And I say, "My loyalty is with my family. I'm making $9.50 an hour here." So I went to another state to work. So they fired me. And I was like, "Thank you, bye-bye." So right now I'm on my way to a public power rally with the Bronx Greens and the Bronx Upper Manhattan branch of the DSA. Public power means that we want our electricity, which right now is in the hands of Con Edison, a monopoly and private company, to be in public hands and democratized. More videos to come.
But this is only the first step, right? We have to convince our neighbors that there's an alternative. You don't have to convince them that Con Ed is bad. We have to convince them that there's an alternative and public power is the way forward. So the way that we do that is through phone banking and canvassing, right? We have phone banking shifts starting every Wednesday and Sunday. Sign up. You guys, if you signed in, you're gonna get an email, I'm sure, probably, or a text. We're gonna bug you. But before then, go to the website, sign up for a phone bank. This is how we're gonna win. At the same time, next Sunday, April 18th, we're gonna kick off our actual in-person canvassing. We need to touch people where they're at. Some people don't pick up the phones. We have to actually touch them in person. It's springtime. We've been inside for the whole last year. Let's get back outside.
Hey, you can start right now.
Okay, we're here with James. James, tell us about yourself.
So how you doing? My name is James Dennis. I'm a DSA, NYC DSA member. I'm a Bronx resident, lifelong Bronx resident from the Northeast Bronx. Just passionate about doing the right thing and trying to get a green infrastructure, getting the right type of infrastructure made, and to get the wrong type of for-profit.
Tell us about public power, what we want.
So what we want in public power is public control of utilities, right? For-profit utilities, public utilities, like I said, is a contradiction. It shouldn't exist. Things that go for the public service, for the public good, should be controlled by the public. We should have all control over the budgeting, over who controls all the budgeting, everything to those aspects. So this, we're trying to turn the power in Albany over from these private companies to people like you and I.
All right, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. All right, cool. Okay, we're talking with James, one of the organizers for this public power rally. James, tell us about public power.
Yeah, so public power is an opportunity to take an entity like Con Edison. We're here rallying out in front of their building, which is a for-profit monopoly that serves New York City and the areas outside of it, and is essentially just like steals money from the people and gives it to shareholders and investors. So we want to present an alternative solution, take it over, turn it into something that's publicly owned, democratically controlled, start to really build renewables and start to address climate change and some of the issues that obviously Con Ed is not really incentivized to deal with. So we are here in support of two bills, the New York Build Public Renewables Act and the the New York Utility Democracy Act, which will bring us those things.
Awesome. I really couldn't say it any better. That's everything. But I also just wanted to thank James for reaching out to the Bronx Greens to show up to this and show solidarity. Us leftist organizations don't do this enough. We need to work together, especially when we both have the exact same goals and to make positive change in our communities.
Yeah, for sure. Public power, winning public power is going to take everyone. I'm really glad that you got everyone out here. We were able to work together. I'm hoping to see some more of you guys out of the canvas going forward. We got our next canvas coming up next Sunday, the 18th or so. And yeah, we'll be knocking on doors and talking to people about public power, and hope to see you there.
All right. What is feminism? Feminism is very simply the belief that men and women should be treated equally in this world. And can a man be a feminist? Well, if you're a man and you believe that men and women should be treated equally, then absolutely you can be a male feminist. And what is socialist feminism? Socialist feminism understands that capitalism is a system that creates these unnatural and immoral hierarchies in our society, one being that men are above and superior to women, and that is immoral. So socialist feminism seeks to break that hierarchy so men and women can be treated equally in the society.
I challenge anybody to find one piece of information in the Bible that you can prove to be false.
I mean, let's start with the book of Genesis. When God ordered Abraham to murder his own son, what kind of God would do something like that? Then according to the Bible, the earth is only 6,000 years old. We know that is false. There is no historical evidence that Moses ever lived or that the Jews built the Egyptian pyramids. It's a fairy tale, and if you want to follow it, fine, if it makes you be a better person. But don't push your ideas on the rest of us. This is a recent comment made to me criticizing a recent video I made on the Bible and how false it is, the absurdity of it all. It says, would you listen to a 2-year-old on morality? And as a matter of fact, I might. Being a father, a lot of times children have more morality than adults. They are not ruined by all the evils within our society, meaning the organized religions that teach a false morality, racism, capitalism, imperialism, all the evils that are normalized within our society. A lot of times children are pure, they're honest, and sometimes they could run circles around us by knowing what's right and what's wrong. Sometimes I just like debunking these anti-communist myths because, frankly, I think it's important because a lot of us, including me at one point, believed them. The idea that under socialism, everything would be under state ownership, everyone would work for the government, and that's not true. Every socialist society has participated in something called collectivization, where the workers independently own the means of production. A lot of times it had to do with agriculture. But it is true that at one point in the transition to socialism, the state would expropriate the industry from the capitalists. But what has happened many times is these societies have come under such attack, usually from the United States, that the process has been halted. Socialists are not statists, we're not nationalists, we want the state eventually to wither away. So it's important that we discuss the transition period and that state ownership of everything is only one point in that transition.
Don't overthink this, look in my eye, don't be scared, don't be shy, come on in, the water's fine. You say the ocean's rising like I give a shit.
I don't know how my videos end up on right-wing TikTok. I put a lot of leftist hashtags, but ultimately they do. And you know what? It's fine. I don't have a problem with it. At the end of the day, I don't want to be speaking into a leftist echo chamber. We need to build our movement. So reactionaries are going to see my videos and comment and get angry and do all that, and that's fine. And this statement right here is actually true. With any capitalist organization, the primary goal is to maximize profits. And if you don't maximize profits, you're going to get bought out or go out of business. So they need to maximize profits for shareholders. So they will pay their employees as little as possible. And that's made easier when there's a permanent group of millions of unemployed people that will basically work next to nothing in order to get employment. The permanently unemployed are a huge tool for the capitalists within any capitalist system like ours. This is not the first time I've seen a response like this to one of my videos by a right-winger who somehow found my TikToks through the algorithm, and it's really common, and I can understand it because of the way capitalism works, and American capitalism more specifically. I've been working since I was 15 years old. Right now, I work for my city. I'm in the medical field. I really like my job. I've been there for 14 years. One of the reasons I like it is because I am not getting shareholders rich. It's not perfect, but I like what I do. I serve my community. But I've worked all different kinds of jobs. I work for big national companies. I work for small companies, and all of them have been centered around making the owners rich. And when people enter the workforce, they see how much things suck for workers. And a lot of them are like, damn, I gotta join the bourgeoisie. I can't put up with this. And then the other people say, I need to advocate for workers. And that's what I'm doing. This is an excellent statement, but I also want you to imagine this guy starts a business and he wants to treat his workers well. He was in the workforce and he saw how badly workers were treated. And he says, I'm going to start a business and I'm going to treat my workers well. I'm going to give them good benefits. And he's built enough capital. He has investors and he starts his company. But the competition is stiff and the investors want him to make changes. And if he doesn't, he's either going to get bought out or go out of business. And he really went into this with the best of intentions. But the way they want him to cut corners is by lowering wages and lowering benefits. And he brought these investors in to divide the risk, but now they have some say in how the company runs. So he lowers benefits, lowers pay, and now he's just another greedy capitalist. And thank you so much for this comment. It's an excellent comment, and that's true. The barista's labor is worthless without the building, the machinery, and the ingredients, all which were built or farmed by workers. All of it. And especially those ingredients that might have been farmed in the global south by people making $2 a day, or maybe even by children, or maybe even by slaves. They could even be working for American companies down there whose shareholders are very happy that they're making such a big profit off of this cheap labor. And let's not forget the engineers who designed the building and the machinery. Engineers are workers, and sometimes they're forgotten because they're very important. And then we have the shareholders who add nothing of value to the company. They put in their investment and they want a return on it by any means necessary.
A lot of you guys like to say that socialism will solve the problem of greed.
I want to thank you for tagging me in this video. There's so much content I would like to address. I'm a former conservative, so I know the arguments. I used to believe the arguments. It was very convenient in this country to agree with all of it. Because this is the global center of capitalism. But something happens when you read Marxist theory, when you study these revolutions from the perspective of the revolutionaries, you realize everything that we were told is a lie. I want to quote John Maynard Keynes, the famous capitalist economist. He said, capitalism is the astounding belief that the most wickedest of men will do the most wickedest of things for the greatest good of everyone. This is a system where the first capitalists were slave traders and slave owners, and it's still based on exploitation. So let's oppose it and build something better. Right-wingers will often say, show me where systemic racism is happening now. Slavery is abolished, Jim Crow is abolished, there's no more systemic racism. And that's not true. As long as we live in a capitalist system, we will have racism. The system that we talk about in systemic racism is capitalism. Capitalism is a hierarchical system with the wealthy ruling capitalist class at the top and the rest of us at the bottom in different levels of hierarchy. And in a country like the United States, people of color, primarily Black, Hispanic, indigenous people, will be towards the bottom. The system requires that. If we abolish capitalism, would racism automatically disappear? No. But an anti-capitalist system would not encourage and feed upon racism. It would not require racism to keep us divided. Because the last thing the ruling class wants us to be is united and focusing our attention on them. American news media is reporting today that there have been massive protests in Cuba against the government. They are demanding that conditions improve. This country has been under an economic embargo for the past 70 years, and people are tired of it. What our media does not report, that in countries like Chile, Colombia, Haiti, and recently Peru, there have been even bigger protests against their governments, which are capitalist neo-colonies of the United States. Some of these countries have even worse poverty rates than Cuba and are not under decades of an economic embargo. Many people in the United States don't know this, but the Cuban president is allowed to serve 2 5-year terms. Their president, Miguel Diaz-Canel, is in his first of possibly 2 terms. You cannot shoot a man in the leg and then blame him for being shot in the leg. So lift the embargo and let's see how socialism really works. In 2019, I went to Cuba. I wanted to see for myself a socialist country. I'd been a socialist myself for a while. I wanted to speak to the people. I wanted to know if they felt oppressed. I wanted to know if they felt that they lacked democracy. What I found amazed me. Right before I went, they ratified their new constitution that was written starting at the local level and voted all the way up to the national level, where 90% of the people voted to maintain socialism and continue their struggle for socialism. I found a people that were so intelligent and understood that the majority of the problems in their country were due to decades of embargo. Now compare that to the United States, where our Constitution was written over 200 years ago and was written by a bunch of wealthy slave owners who wanted to maintain power and keep the power out of the hands of the working people as much as possible. I say again, if you really oppose socialism, tell our government to lift the embargo so we could really see if socialism doesn't work. I could partially agree with the statement. I mean, imagine a thriving socialist society just 90 miles off the coast of the United States where people's needs are met. They have a fully functioning democracy, more workers' rights. I mean, imagine the US just letting that happen. But it's not just about proximity, because the United States has done this in faraway parts of the world too, mainly Asia, the Middle East. So it's about brown people, it's about the global South, it's about the Cuba being a former neo-colony of the United States and not letting them thrive and get away from our imperialism. A lot of people don't know this, but right now Portugal is being run by a coalition between the Communist Party, the Socialist Party, and the Green Party. And we don't hear about that so much here because it's a white European country and they can do whatever they want. A lot of us in the US confuse socialism with liberalism. Socialism is not meant to help capitalism. It's meant to replace capitalism with a better system. Liberal policies are meant to help capitalism. One of the reasons that we have an explosion of homelessness and poverty across the United States is that about 40 years ago, we abandoned Keynesian economics. From the Great Depression to around the early 80s, the US used an economic strategy called Keynesian economics, which is a much more regulated version of capitalism, and it worked pretty well. But since we've abandoned Keynesianism, we've seen an explosion in poverty, homelessness, addiction, and all the other things that come along with deregulated capitalism. We could talk about homelessness in California, but we can also talk about the fact that the poorest states in the country are all Republican-led states. So what can we do? We can either regulate capitalism again, or we can change to a better system. Yeah, thank you so much for the comment. This is a very common misconception that a lot of people have, that we are just utopians, we are idealists. We are actually the opposite. We are materialists. We take a scientific approach to society, to human nature, to the economy. You could read Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific by Friedrich Engels to further understand our approach to scientific socialism and applying these principles to society. And just the human nature argument, I understand it. Humans are complex creatures. A part of our human nature is to exploit, is to hurt each other. And capitalism is a system that is based on that exploitation, based on harming and hurting other people. So we shouldn't have a system based on that. Marx and other socialist revolutionaries wrote a lot about that. If we read their books and we read about their experiences implementing these ideas, we can learn a lot. Socialism works.
What Biden support? You guys don't support Biden. You just support the fact that Trump is out of office.
Wow, I kind of agree with this. I mean, I don't agree with pretty much anything Trump supporters say, but I guess sometimes they're like a broken clock. They're right twice a day. I don't know any Biden supporters, even of my liberal friends. Nobody supports Biden. Nobody really likes Biden. They just didn't want Trump. Biden is a war criminal. He wrote the 94 crime bill. In the 70s, he supported segregation. Biden is horrible. And I am not a Biden supporter. I supported a socialist candidate in the 2020 election because I don't believe in settling for the lesser of two evils. Settling for the lesser of two evils got us Joe Biden as a Democratic candidate. And it will continue to get worse as we continue to settle for the less of two evils. When I see comments like this from capitalist apologists, it just shows me that these people don't know that there are different capitalisms. Capitalism in the global south is much different than what we have up here in the global north, in the imperial core, especially for colonizers. Capitalism in the global south is a system of oppression. There is such high poverty, such high exploitation, and then a centralized group of oligarchs, similar to what we have here, but much, much worse. The poverty, the crime, and these countries are not under dozens and dozens of sanctions putting people under poverty. It's just capitalism. And then we have socialist countries like Cuba that actually have higher literacy, better education, better healthcare, better quality of life than a lot of countries that are capitalists that don't have sanctions. It's pretty amazing, and it shows socialism is a better system. Hey guys, Bronx Prol here. I just want to let you all know something that some of you might not know, that these are Cuban doctors, and when there's a global health crisis, Cuba sends these doctors all around the world to countries that are in need, that are having a hard time taking care of their people during a public health crisis. So as Cuban doctors were going around the world, risking their lives, saving lives, the United States put them back on the state sponsors of terror list. They also increased sanctions that are now causing so many food and medication shortages and added to why people are protesting there right now. If this is not cruelty, I don't know what is. Just last week, the UN voted again to ask the United States to end the blockade. See, how the blockade works is that any country or company that trades with Cuba will be fined and barred from trading with the United States. So again, tell your friends, demand the end of the blockade. I could totally understand why someone would want that. I mean, we had it in the New Deal, and it felt like a nice compromise between the workers and the ruling class when we got some more scraps, some more worker protections, bigger welfare state, and the ruling class could have power over us. And it works in Europe and parts of Scandinavia as well pretty well. The problem is that the United States is the global center of capitalism, so all the contradictions within capitalism are heightened here. These social democratic policies really only lasted a couple decades until they were repealed. Even in 1947, the Taft-Hartley Act was passed to take a lot of power away from unions. So let's have a system that doesn't keep power in the oligarchy. Let's have a system that puts power into the working class. It's really not that scary of a thing. We can govern better ourselves than having sociopaths rule over us. A lot of people say social democracy or regulated capitalism is the best compromise. It's the way to be. But let's look at what happened with the New Deal. Those policies only lasted for a few decades, and then they were repealed. Why were they repealed? Because capitalism is a system that requires growth, nonstop, constant, forever growth. And when brakes and limits are put on that growth, the people who own these companies and capitalism as a system fights that tooth and nail. In the human nature argument, I talk about this a lot, but a lot of times when I see people saying this, I say, speak for yourself. What does this say about you? Because I'm not going around trying to hurt and exploit and extort people. Socialist and communalist societies have existed throughout time and have done very well, especially when they were not under constant attack. So instead of once again saying, please give me more scraps, please ruling class, let's take the power and govern ourselves.
All to see without my eyes. The first time that you kissed me, boundless by the time I cried. I built your walls around
They have a dictatorship with a president who can serve 2 5-year terms, who was elected by the people. They don't have an electoral college. Their elections are won by popular vote. They have no super delegates. When you go to vote in Cuba, you use a paper ballot, and that ballot box is protected by 2 children. Because are you really going to steal or tamper with that ballot box in front of 2 kids? And at the end of the day, the community goes back to the polling station and they watch all the ballots get counted all together. Instead of, like in the United States, running with these 2 phony baloney parties, in Cuba they run on what they believe will help the Cuban people. So yeah, we have a lot to envy with their electoral system. I just want to say that I support anyone's right to protest, to resist, to speak out against their government, and that includes the Cuban people. I know not all the people protesting there want capitalism either. They just want a more fair system, and they want their needs to be met, because that's the promise that socialism tries to give people. I do have personal experience going to Cuba, but that's just my personal experience. And the people that I met there, for the most part, understood that the shortages and the hardship that they face is because of the embargo. But to call it a tyrannical government, I think is unfair. Let's remember what the US did to Japanese Americans when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. Only one time. They put all Japanese Americans in concentration camps for the rest of the war. That is tyrannical. That is oppressive. Our aim should be that the embargo be lifted. In a TikTok that I made earlier, I said that a lot of the New Deal reforms that were meant to protect workers have been repealed. Someone in the comments asked me to be a little more specific about what were some of these repeals made. So I'm going to talk about the Taft-Hartley Act of 1947. It gained bipartisan support. It was meant directly to hurt workers and union membership. Under Taft-Hartley, union leadership had to sign an oath saying that they were not a socialist. It also gave southern states specific permission to create right-to-work laws, which we've seen grow all over the country by now. These right-to-work laws dealt a huge blow to the working class. In 1947, wages and union membership were at their very highest in the US. The capitalist class always works by divide and conquer, so a divided workplace always means the workers will be losing. One of the biggest reasons for the Great Depression was that retail banks were doing speculative investing in the stock market. So the Glass-Steagall Act of 1933 was created to separate retail banks from investment banks. It worked very well and prevented banks from getting too big and becoming banking monopolies. It was repealed in 1999 under the Clinton administration with bipartisan support. 2 high-ranking Democrats who supported the repeal of Glass-Steagall were President Bill Clinton and Senator Joe Biden. Big banks always work hand in hand with capital to increase their wealth and power and create monopolies that will 100% of the time hurt the workers. This is another very important New Deal reform that was meant to protect the working class, which has been undone by Republicans and Democrats. So today I'm recording episode 4 of my podcast. I've been on a bit of a hiatus from the podcast. I'll let you guys know what's been going on. My parents both got diagnosed with COVID a few months ago, and while they were in the hospital with COVID, my wife was diagnosed with breast cancer. Then my father passed away due to the complications of COVID. My wife has been going through cancer treatment. She's doing well and responding. So it's been a bit of a tough time, but we're getting through it, and I'm really excited about my guest today. Her name is Janet. She's a local organizer from around my way. Something that's interesting about her is she's a former libertarian and stockbroker turned socialist, so I think we're going to have a lot of fun, and we're definitely going to go into her journey and how she found libertarianism, how she got out. So I hope you all check it out and enjoy.
Do you think that the military is a good alternative to some people instead of prison?
Absolutely not. The answer to our bloated prison population is not for these people to join the U.S. military, be brainwashed into American exceptionalism and imperialism, and go around the world murdering innocent brown people who are usually poor, and help steal resources and enslave these people for the profit of American corporations. When is the last time that the U.S. military defended our freedom? The U.S. military's job is not to defend our freedom. It is to go around the world and fight for the interests of American companies. And then after they're done with you, they throw you away like garbage.
It's never your successful friends posting the communist quotes.
I'll tell you who's sharing communist quotes. It's the people who understand what is going on in this country and this world to workers. Personally, I'm doing okay. I own a home. I have a car. I have a freaking pool in New York City. I work very hard in my job and I'm successful. And I'm at one of the few jobs that you can be a worker and be able to afford this. But that's getting less and less in this world. The average worker works in retail, works in food service, works at some Amazon warehouse, and that is the reality for people. Whether you are high school educated, college educated, people with master's degrees are working in retail, working for minimum wage. I want to know how many of you people that consider yourself successful came from wealth, came from privilege, had mommy and daddy helping you, because it's getting harder and harder to come from the bottom and make something of yourself because of neoliberal capitalism. Soon, with the way things are going, it will be impossible. We will be facing Great Depression conditions again if we don't change things and wake up.
So Edwin, tell me what happens when someone with the best of intentions runs for office with the Democratic Party?
Well, I'll tell you, Chris, you might have the best intentions as a progressive, but ultimately the leadership determines the direction of the party. And both corporate parties, Democrat and Republican, don't view healthcare as a human right. So even if your agenda going in as a Justice Democrat was to provide healthcare to all people, ultimately Nancy Pelosi is your master. That's why AOC has called her Mama Bear, because you need to make sure that you take the revolution outside the two-party duopoly if you want material change for the working class, because you can't shoehorn a working class movement into a corporate party. And as you saw with Bernie running for president 2 times, the DNC kneecapped him, rigged the primary against him. We all saw what happened with the Shadow app in Iowa, and Bernie Sanders with...
So I'm just going to talk about my personal experience here. This is not due to surveys or anything like that, but I live in a big city, and I know a lot of people from Eastern Europe. And most of them left Eastern Europe after those countries became capitalist. One friend in particular says, I really wanted capitalism. I looked at the West, I saw all the stuff, I saw all the electronics, I saw all the clothes, I wanted Levi jeans, and I wanted all that stuff. And we didn't have all the commodities that you guys had in Eastern Europe. He was from Romania. And he said once they got capitalism, they realized what a mistake they had all made. Because that's when he saw all the homelessness, all the joblessness, all the poverty that comes with capitalism. There's a price to pay to get all that stuff. And then they all had to move to America because the economy became so bad after capitalism. I get it. Why can't we just have a kinder, gentler, softer type of capitalism? It seems to work in other countries, and it's much better than what we have here, but we tried that here. We had the New Deal, and it was better. Things were more stable. The working class had more wealth and stability, but those policies only worked for a few years, like maybe 30 or 40 until the late 70s. And then we went to neoliberalism. See, this is the center of global capitalism. You can either have it two ways. You can have a ruling class rule over us. You can have the workplace run like a dictatorship, or we can have the people run the workplace democratically. We can either have it two ways. You can't have both. And the reason those societies have been so totalitarian is because they were under constant attack from the United States and other Western capitalist countries. It won't be like that once we are socialist. This is a really great question, and I know a lot of people have this fear that we would look like China, we would look like Russia. And the answer is absolutely not. Socialism is based on a principle called dialectical materialism. Our socialist society would look nothing like China or Russia. It would be based on our material needs and our culture. They call it socialism with Chinese characteristics. Well, our socialism might be socialism with American characteristics. And ultimately, If the people don't want socialism, we're not going to have it because it is a people-driven movement. So until we get tired of living under an economic dictatorship and having the vast majority of our labor value stolen by sociopaths who are now in a space race, we're going to continue to live under capitalism. Yes, this is super important to do, and a lot of people misunderstand these terms like communism, socialism, democratic socialism, social democracy. Communism is a stateless, classless, moneyless, borderless society, and it has never existed. It is an ideal that we hope to reach at some point in the future. So when you hear about communist country, that's really a misnomer because you can't have a communist country. You can have a socialist country. And what a lot of these countries have done, they've began the transition into socialism towards communism. Part of that transition is the state expropriating capital and industry from the capitalists, and then they get under heavy attack by the international capitalist community, and the process kind of gets halted right there. These countries get sanctioned, they get war declared on them, like in Vietnam, the US poisoned their water and food supply, so they struggle a lot. Last week I made a TikTok at a protest in front of AOC's office. It was put together by leftists, it wasn't put together by right wingers. And there are some valid criticisms of AOC squad by the left. And there was a mixed response to that TikTok. The people against us said that we were attacking her. There is no attacking it. There's no attack. What's important to remember is that socialist ideology is the critique of everything. We must critique the people, institutions, and ideas that we support. We must think critically and objectively. When someone is elected into office through a party that opposes every single thing that we want in society, that person is going to face a lot of resistance. We know that. So we want to hold them accountable and know we have not forgotten what we put them into office for. Last week I made a TikTok at a protest in front of AOC's office in criticism of her by leftists. I got a mixed response from people. Some people said that we were attacking AOC. That's a very exaggerated term to use for what we were doing. We want to hold our elected officials accountable. When someone is elected into the Democratic Party, that party is going to do everything they can to stop the policies and ideas that we want brought forth into society. We understand AOC has done some good, but nobody is above criticism. Never fall into being an apologist for a person or an idea or an institution. Always think critically.
So the Marxists, by definition, are somewhat removed from the workers as part of an intelligentsia that...
Antonio Gramsci, Italian Marxist member of parliament, who was also killed by Benito Mussolini, had a term he used called the organic intellectual. The organic intellectual was a worker among workers, but they were highly educated in philosophy, economics, history, Marxism, and raised class consciousness among workers. See, 100 years ago, there were many, many organic intellectuals among the working class. Fast forward to the 1947 Taft-Hartley Act that is still on the books today that bans union leadership from being communist. They have to sign an oath that they are not a communist. So the claim that the communists and the workers were in two different groups and two different classes is completely false and totally ignores history.